Hey, welcome to day 7 of this series in self-sufficiency and how to get from wherever you are now to a better level of self-sufficiency. And the topic of today is called many different names. It can be called stockpiling. It could be called caching. It could be called storage. It could be called, and it's also called hoarding a lot as well. And so we'll talk about those things and why it is important to stockpile different needs that you have, okay? Food, water, etc. And, a lot of people look at this and they say that it's wrong, right? Hoarding has a negative connotation with it, but we'll talk about that. The first thing that I want to discuss is the fact that you're encouraged to stockpile. Okay, you are encouraged to stockpile. You are told to stockpile. The government encourages you to stockpile, believe it or not. Financial advisors can encourage you to stockpile. Okay, FEMA, which is obviously the government as well, but they encourage you to stockpile. If you haven't noticed lately in the news, there's been a lot of these press conferences and things from government officials, from the federal government to the state governments to county governments, etc., city governments that talk about their stockpiles and pushing stockpiles forward. National stockpiles. This has been a theme, are being pushed forward to the different states where the biggest need is. And so what does that imply? Well, that implies that we obviously have a national stockpile. We stockpile medical supplies, we stockpile ammunition, we stockpile oil reserves, we stockpile food and medicine, etc., etc. Okay, they are national stockpiles. Okay, states stockpile those types of items as well, and they may differ in what they are, but they definitely have stockpiles, and so do counties. Counties also stockpile. Cities also stockpile to varying degrees and different things. FEMA encourages you to stockpile. Okay, they call it, emergency storage, and they actually have pretty decent information about what they want you to do and how you do it and how you can cook and how you can filter water and those types of things, but they encourage you to stockpile. Now, how much do they encourage you to stockpile? Well, if you read their literature, they'll tell you that they want you to store 2 weeks worth of food and 2 weeks worth of water. Now, that's good advice. I mean, everyone should have at least that much on hand for sure. But let's talk about that. Is that adequate? Well, let's go back again to national strategy. We have in the United States what we call a continuity of government. Okay, and this is what widely known. You can read all about this, and it goes all the way back to Eisenhower. I mean, sure, there was plans, but even before him, but that's where I think things kind of got a little bit more formalized, maybe a little bit more robust with the era of nuclear weapons. Okay, so in Eisenhower going forward, there's been this kind of formalized program of continuity of government or continuity of operations. And that is basically say during a time of significant emergency like nuclear war or something, I don't know, totally dramatic that would cause there to be a serious issue with the continuity of government or the continuity of operations, that there would be a plan in place to be able to meet that emergency. Okay, everyone kind of understands that there are secret bunkers and places where government officials go to in time of, say, nuclear war. And as an example, a well-known site is Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. Okay, it's this mountain complex where certain officials, military, civilian, could go and ride out a storm of, say, a nuclear attack. Okay, and there are various other sites all over. Many of those are published, but obviously there are some that are very secretive, and those plans change all the time. So I don't know what the current plan is, other than there are places where people will go in something like that, something very significant like that. There's also the idea of the mobile command post, right? After 9/11, President Bush was flying around a lot to be moving, etc. So there is the stationary mountain, complex bunker style hideaway, and then there's mobile commands that happen, and that's a continuity of operations. Now, I couldn't tell you what type of storage that they have, other than obviously there's stores, there's stockpiles that are in that for that continuity of government. And I don't know what, like how long could they sustain themselves, today? Like, what is the plan today, and what are they planning for? But trust me, there's a number that they're planning for. Is it 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? I don't know what that is. What I can tell you, though, is that documents that have been released, declassified over time in the 70s, or from the 70s, said that government, the continuity of government, needed to have stores enough for 6 months. Okay, they needed to have enough to be able to sustain people for 6 months. And they had these, what they call these interagency groups. And so they basically, pre-assembled teams, and they call interagency teams of about 50, and they would go to different locations, right? So if these locations were completely taken out, there would still be these interagency teams over in other areas. Okay, and these interagency teams would represent different areas of government. Okay, so for example, there might be representation for the Senate, the judiciary, maybe the USDA, maybe the FBI, or something like that. So in other words, if all this fell apart, they could come out and someone would be familiar with USDA type operations, FBI type, law enforcement type operations, etc. Okay, so again, in the 70s, these teams were expected and had stores to last 6 months in this continuity of operations. Now, the purpose was that they could then continue essential governmental functions. Okay, essential governmental functions, communication between branches, defense, etc. I'm here to tell you that the essential government functions in a type of really bad scenario like that did not include feeding you. It does not include feeding you. 6 months of stores was for that group, okay, that interagency group, so that in the aftermath, they could come out and reestablish government and start things rolling again. Okay, that was the goal, right? They're not going to be able, that's not 6 months of food storage for you. That's 6 months of food storage. I'm using food storage as an example for that interagency team. Okay, so there in the 70s, we're storing up, say, 6 months for these individual teams, and FEMA is telling you 2 weeks. You can do the math, and you can decide what is a wise course of action, for you. Each individual, each family, each community, each local area needs to come up with that idea on their own, right? That you can model and you can look at worst case scenarios and then, or some different scenarios, and then determine what you think is right. But what I can tell you, though, is that it is a wise and prudent idea to stockpile essential items. Now, stockpile. So the government does it on the federal level, the state level, local level. They do it, but somehow it's bad if an individual or a family does it, or there's this negative connotation where we call it hoarding. Right? Hoarding is simply just a collection of certain types of items. Okay, there is certainly an unhealthy level of hoarding, and you see the shows out there on hoarding that really make it look bad, because it is bad in those cases. If somebody's collecting, let's say, clothes or whatever, they can't stop buying things. But hoarding or stockpiling essentials, like the ability to heat one's home in an extended power outage. the ability just to feed one's family over a long period of time, the ability to have water or to be able to obtain water and filter it, over a long period of time is prudent and wise. Yet we don't do that. Same thing with finances, right? Everyone knows. I would be hard pressed to find somebody, unless they just literally are not paying attention, that they shouldn't have an emergency fund. You might disagree on how much that emergency fund should be. Should it be $1,000? Should it be 3 months worth of expenses, 6 months worth of expenses, etc., or 3 to 6 months, right? So most financial advisors say 6 months worth of expenses. Now, people will then tell you immediately, it's just impossible for certain people to save 6 months worth or even 3 months worth of expenses, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, got it. But a lot of those same people have iPhones and Netflix and nice cars, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so everybody makes choices, and everybody can save something. Not everybody's willing to, because we have this system that works really well until it doesn't. So, where's the lesson here? You should stockpile, cache, hoard items that are essential for you. You need to decide what that number is. What does that mean? Or how much, how long, to sustain yourself and your family. When you sustain yourself and your family, you reduce pressure off of the system. You reduce pressure from your community. You are able to then help your community. And if your community is filled with people that do this, then that community can impact the local area and the regional area, and ultimately be a benefit to the country as well. For everybody who was immediately within 24 hours out of supplies, that is putting pressure on the community. Now, let me address another thing. Is there's a lot of negativity towards people who are hoarding right now, right? They lambaste them. They talk poorly about them. They tell them they're hoarders. The reality is that those who are prepared, those who are preparedness minded, and I'm not talking about preppers and survivalists. I'm talking about just everyday preparedness. Okay, you're prepared for a job loss. You're prepared for a power outage for 2 or 3 days. You're prepared for an ice storm, right? You're prepared for a loss of income, etc. That's everyday preparedness, right? And those that are upset with other people who are hoarding right now are unprepared themselves. It's not the prepared people who are lambasting people for hoarding. That's a natural reaction to be like, wow, I was totally unprepared for this. And now I'm panicking. I'm doing a little bit of panicking here, but I'm now trying to catch up, okay? Because inherently, I think we all understand that we should be prepared. We just don't, okay? I'm going to close with this. As we look at throughout history, you can look at the Bible, and you can look at Proverbs, and you can look at the fact that it talks about prudent man sees danger and prepares for it, or we have these great lessons. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and consider her ways. We have all these things where we can look at the wisdom of storing up. Now, I'm not suggesting that that particular verse was about food storage. It's actually about other things, the hard work, diligence, and that kind of stuff. The Protestant work ethic came out of verses like that, or those types of principles. But there's also a practical lesson there as well. And we can look at Aesop's fables, right? The ant and the grasshopper, very famous throughout history. And we look at the prudence and the diligence and the hard work of the ant versus the grasshopper who plays in summer and then goes to the ant when wintertime is approaching and says, give me food. Okay, so we can, you can look at that. You can look at the wildlife right now and their amazing ability and what they do to store store up for winter, or store up for hard times, if you will. You look at birds, squirrels, shrews, beavers, and on and on and on. And what they do, and they do things like they store up food. They spend the summer collecting seeds and nuts, and there's even ants, like fire ants. They will take bits and pieces of prey, because they prey on other animals, and they will bury them under their mounds, and they will preserve the meat, if you will, and jerky it so that they have food during the winter. Okay, or the fact that squirrels create all these different caches of nuts and seeds, and they spread them out so that if some of them are compromised, they still have other ones. Okay, so we have all these examples, and the wildlife do it, and our government does it, and our government actually encourages us to do it. They just encourage us to do it very little. I'm encouraging you to do it much more than that. It's up to you on what you think is a prudent and appropriate to stockpile, but stockpile you should. All right, and one last thing is that stockpiling is good, and keeping those supplies on hand is a very wise, prudent idea, but it does not take the place of knowledge, skills, and abilities. Okay, so again, supplies and having supplies on hand is a great thing, but it does not replace knowledge, skills, and abilities. And unfortunately, I see that a lot, where people will stockpile, good, but they don't have the skills, knowledge, and abilities to even utilize some of those stockpiles as an example. Okay, so don't make that mistake either. Stockpiling is good, but also work on your knowledge, skills, and abilities.